Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Educator Speaker Series, Reaching and Teaching All Learners Through Visual Art. This series is a relatively new LACMA program in which we invite K-12 teachers to give presentations and workshops for their peers on topics in art education that center on criticality and social justice. My name is Laura Schilling, and I am the Content Specialist for Teacher Programs at LACMA. I am a fair-skinned woman with curly blonde hair, and I also have bangs, and I'm wearing a blue t-shirt today. I'm sitting in the same room that I'm usually sitting in if you've seen me on other virtual programs. It's my dining room, and there are some white closet doors behind me and an artwork that I made on the wall. At today's program, educator Sydney Snyder is going to be speaking with us about how to create more inclusive, accessible classroom environments that support students of all abilities. She will discuss inclusive model practices, universal design for learning, disability visibility, and more. I'm really excited about this topic and how broadly applicable and important it is, and super grateful that we have this platform to share it with you. The program will be recorded and uploaded to our YouTube channel, so you will be able to rewatch it and share it with your colleagues. If you would like to access live captions today, please click live transcript and then show subtitle on the Zoom toolbar on your screen. My AV colleagues are providing tech support, so if you have any tech-related questions, please feel free to send a message to tech support. I would like to open the program with a land acknowledgement from my current residence on ancestral unceded Tongva land, part of which is now known as South Los Angeles. And we can go to the next slide. LACMA respectfully acknowledges that the lands on which our museum is built and the region that we serve is the ancestral and unceded territories of the Gabrieleño Tongva, Gabrieleño Kich, Fernandeño Tataviam, and Ventureño Chumash peoples. Los Angeles County has been and is home to many indigenous peoples. And today I want to shout out the Fernandeño Tataviam Nation, whose ancestral lands span from present-day Simi Valley and Malibu in the west, Cahuenga and Encino in the south, Tahunga in the east, and present-day Tejon Ranch in the north. They do some really amazing educational work, and I'm putting the link to their website in the chat, as well as a YouTube link to a Tataviam storybook reading they did recently with the Natural History Museum. Those links are in the chat. And before we get into what Sydney has prepared for us, I want to make sure everyone knows about the Evenings for Educators event happening next Tuesday at LACMA. You can go to the next slide. Evenings for Educators is our long-running arts integration program, and this is the first time, yes, the very first time, we will be back in person since early 2020. We are super excited to be back at the museum in person with you all, and we really hope that you'll join us. We have a lot planned for the evening, which focuses on the special Barbara Kruger exhibition. And I'm just curious to take the temperature. Are folks familiar with Barbara Kruger? I'm going to take a quick look and see. Okay, looks like some people are. Even if you don't recognize her name, you've probably seen her work before. She typically is known for juxtaposing black and white photographs with red and white text that critique mass media, consumption, and contemporary culture. Please come to the program to learn more about her incredible body of work. We'll have a lecture with curator Rebecca Morse, hands-on workshops and gallery activities, and of course, dinner. And I'm going to post the links in the chat one more time. The LACMA resources link has the link to sign up for this event. Please join us. And the link I shared also includes some really great other resources, including curriculum materials and online courses. And without further ado, I would like to now introduce today's speaker, Sydney Snyder. Sydney Snyder is a multidisciplinary artist and art educator in Los Angeles. This is her 10th year teaching art in a school setting. Sydney has spent the last 7 years working with students of all intellectual and physical abilities. In addition to facilitating adaptive art practices to ensure art is accessible to her students, Sydney employs the TAB, Teaching for Artistic Behavior, philosophy of teaching, in which students have access to a wide variety of mediums and can create art about any subject they choose while learning the studio habits of mind. In 2017, she founded an inclusive after-school enrichment program and summer camp called Art Encounter. Sydney also works as a co-conspirator at Adding Voices with founder Flavia Zuñiga-West, creating culturally responsive curriculum resources, editing newsletters, and organizing events. I'm going to turn it over to Sydney now, and she will start sharing her presentation. Thanks for being here, everyone.
All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. Thank you so much, Laura, for the introduction. And thank you to everyone who's choosing to join us here tonight. I am really excited to be here with all of you. My name is Sydney. My pronouns are she, her. I am a fair-skinned woman with medium length brown hair. I am wearing a light blue shirt by artist Meg Emiko that says Protect Trans Kids. And behind me is a really colorful gallery wall of art by myself and other artists I admire. This topic, reaching and teaching all learners through visual art, is really important to me for many reasons. Like you, it's really important to me to ensure my curriculum is accessible to all of my students in every way possible. It's also important to me for personal reasons. I myself am neurodivergent. I was not diagnosed with ADHD combined type until I was 24 years old, which means I did not receive any services or accommodations in school. And I'm sure I'm not the only one here tonight for whom this is the case. As a teacher, you may be given a stack of quick glances associated with individualized education programs or 504 plans at your school, and it is so important to become familiar with those. But the work we are doing together tonight will not only benefit those students, it should benefit all of your students. And I hope that it will make the work that you do even more fulfilling. So that's a little bit about what brought me here tonight. I'd love to learn more about you and why you are here tonight. If anyone's willing to share an intention with the group in the chat or jump on the mic quickly if that's what is accessible to you, that would be wonderful. So an intention or what brought you here tonight.
What brought me here is because I always learn something from LACMA, and I love these classes, and these programs that they put on for the teachers are great. In particular, with this particular topic, I'm dyslexic, and I didn't get tested until I was in my 40s probably. And although I knew after you learn about what this is, but it's kind of cool to kind of know what's going on if you see some children struggling and be able to kind of help them. And I always say I'm dyslexic because sometimes it's scary, like they're not gonna, like if you don't want to isolate them. So you want to be able to let them know that it's okay. And if they want to talk about it, they can talk about it. And then I'm a visual learner, so.
Thank you so much for jumping on the mic and sharing that. I have found the same thing to be true in my classroom, and I try and share that I'm neurodivergent as well, because I think it opens up possibilities for students, and having a role model that has something in common with you is a good thing. And thank you to everyone sharing in the chat. Okay. So I would love to really quickly establish some group norms. You're welcome to share ideas in the chat, or if anyone would like to jump on the mic instead, that's also an option. So these are just things that, how can we ensure the evening is productive and fruitful for all in attendance? Any thoughts? I'm sure you've been to these things before. And thank you for noticing the open dyslexic font. I'm actually going to talk more about that in a little bit so that everyone on here can learn about it and hopefully start using it. Oh, I see someone said inclusivity is important to me, and I want more docents to understand that when they tour students at LACMA. And I do know that LACMA has a place where you can request, I think, accommodations ahead of a field trip. And I also heard from them personally that they're always open to more education in this area. I know my colleague of mine worked with the Hammer Museum to teach them about communicating with students who use AAC devices. So that's kind of a cool thing, you know, if you're looking for a field trip in Los Angeles. Okay, willingness to learn, clear information.
Oh.
It looks like Sydney's screen might have frozen. So
I
Just watching, and if they don't have it, oh,
That was so weird. I think it just kicked me out of the Zoom for a second. Am I back? Can you see me?
Yes, you're sounding good.
Okay. Thank you. And you can see my slides?
Yes, now we can.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I have to say I started to feel really anxious as I was putting together this presentation because there is so much to cover. And I tried to figure out for months how I could possibly cover it all in 90 minutes. And then I finally figured it out. And the answer is I can't cover it all, not even close. So I'm hoping to accomplish two main things tonight. I hope to share enough to inspire you to want to learn more and provide you with a variety of resources that will empower you to do so in the form of social media accounts to follow, podcasts to listen to or read the transcript for, and websites with more information. Having said that, here is an idea of how we'll be spending our time tonight. We're going to, I'm going to define some key terms that'll come up throughout the presentation just so we're all on the same page. I'm going to share strategies for increasing access, and this is really like the meat of the presentation. I'm going to share artists that you can share with your students. There will be time for reflection and goal setting, time for collaboration in breakout rooms, and a share out in community Q&A. And I like to say community Q&A because I am not the authority on any of these topics. And I feel certain that a lot of people here tonight have experience and wisdom and practical information to share. So I never want to be the only one answering questions. So please feel free to jump in on the chat if you have something to add at any point, or if you see a question pop up that you know the answer to. I think we're going to spend, I tried to time myself earlier, about 60 minutes doing all of this, and then we'll have time for breakout room and then sharing what we did in the breakout room and asking questions. So I recommend if you have a device nearby that's capable of scanning QR codes, I recommend grabbing that because I'm going to have them throughout the presentation, but we are also sharing a PDF with you with all of the links. There's a lot of them. So if you can't access a phone or scan QR codes for any reason, you'll also be able to access those links during and after the presentation via the PDF. And I'm sharing a lot of links because I just want you to be able to access these resources after the fact. And I also want to note that one thing that helps me stay on track during presentations like this is having really detailed notes to reference. So if it sounds a little like I'm reading from a script, it's because I pretty much am. I found it necessary for this presentation in particular because there's so much to cover in such a short period of time. So thank you for understanding. Okay, defining key terms. So disability, an individual with a disability is defined by the ADA as a person who has a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities, a person who has a history or record of such an impairment, or a person who is perceived by others as having such an impairment. And I'm going to read, anytime there's text on a slide, I'm going to try and read everything that's there just because everyone on here might not be able to access that text. Section 504. Section 504 is a civil rights statute that requires a school district to provide a free, appropriate public education to each qualified student with a disability who is in the school district's jurisdiction, regardless of the nature or severity of the disability. And in the PDF of the slides that you'll receive after this presentation, I link my sources here because I didn't want to mess up these definitions. The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, is the major law governing special education, which guarantees a free, appropriate public education to children with disabilities and mandates that, to the maximum extent appropriate, they be educated with their non-disabled peers in the least restrictive environment. And I do want to make clear that my perspective is not that of a legal expert or special education expert. Rather, I'm an art teacher who has benefited tremendously from years of training and collaboration in an inclusive model setting. And inclusive model, by the way, because I don't have that defined here, is a school where the education setting is the same for disabled students as it is for their non-disabled peers, which means that there are no special day classes. Rather, all students learn side by side in the general education classroom, and students who receive designated services like speech therapy or adaptive PE receive them in that classroom rather than being pulled out. So today, approximately 1 out of every 10 students in the United States are identified as having a disability, and approximately 1% of those students identified as having a disability receive an equal opportunity to a free and appropriate public education. This is from the Inclusive Education Project website. They also note that approximately 90% of families of children with disabilities are unaware of their right to a free and appropriate public education. Families who are aware and try to advocate for their children often get lost in the complicated legal system. So once again, it's safe to say that making your classroom and curriculum more accessible will benefit all of your students, not just those who already have an IEP or 504. Oops, I went the wrong direction. So while I am not a legal expert myself, I do want to refer you to some awesome ones. The Inclusive Education Project Instagram account is a great place for what I consider to be just bite-sized information related to special education rights. They define legal terms, they host a podcast and do lots of Q&As right on their Instagram. In addition to the work that you will see on Instagram, they connect qualifying California families with pro bono legal aid for special education support. And here, this QR code links you to their podcast. This one links you to their Instagram. And you'll see quotes like this great one by Ignacio Estrada that says, "If a child can't learn the way we teach, maybe we should teach the way they learn." Throughout the presentation, I will be spotlighting some different educators and organizations like the Inclusive Education Project so that you can continue your learning after this evening. Okay, just a few more terms. So special education, as defined in section 300.39 of IDEA, special education means a specially designed instruction at no cost to the parents to meet the unique needs of a child with a disability. Specially designed instruction means adapting as appropriate to the needs of an eligible child under this part. The content, methodology, or delivery of instruction to address the unique needs of the child that result from the child's disability and to ensure access of the child to the general curriculum so that the child can meet the educational standards within the jurisdiction of the public agency that apply to all children. Accommodations and modifications. An accommodation is an alteration to the environment, curriculum format, or equipment that allows an individual with a disability to access content and or complete assigned tasks. Accommodations do not alter what is being taught. A modification is a change in what is being taught or what is expected of the student. And we're going to be talking more about accommodations and modifications in a little bit. And then person first versus identity first. Person first puts the person before the disability. So an example would be a person who is disabled, whereas identity first leads with a disability or diagnosis like a disabled person. It is important to note that different people prefer different things. Right now, the default tends to be person first language in educational settings in the US. However, many self-advocates in the autism community, for example, prefer the term autistic over person with autism. Adult caregivers may prefer to say child with autism though. It's complicated and there's no rule book here. So to be safe, you can ask someone their preference if you know them well enough that it feels appropriate to do so. And I will try and bounce back and forth between person first and identity first in my own references. Does anyone have anything to add? And yes, you will get slides for this presentation, and it'll be in PDF format, and you'll be able to click all the links that are in there. Okay, I'm gonna keep going then. Okay, so this is really the heart of the presentation, and fair warning, I'm about to share a lot of information with you. Like I just said, I will be sharing a PDF of the slides, so you do not need to worry about taking notes unless that is helpful for you. And it's a lot to cover in 90 minutes, so I'm including links to resources and some really awesome people so you can continue your learning. I will try to answer questions as they come up, but if someone asks a question and you have an answer, once again, please feel free to jump into the chat. Okay, before we can talk about strategies for increasing access, I think it's important to identify some common barriers. We'll be talking about systemic barriers here rather than limitations of individual students. The first barrier I have here is the attitude of educators and/or staff, which would include things like assuming someone with a speech impairment cannot understand you or forming ideas about someone based on stereotypes. It might sound like using a different tone of voice while speaking to someone with a disability. I'm sure we've all heard that before. Architectural barriers are physical barriers like desks that are too close together or too high or too low, poor lighting, that kind of thing. Communication or informational barriers might look like print or a font that is too small or difficult to read, or poorly organized worksheets or presentations. And organizational and systemic barriers can be as simple as requiring students to demonstrate understanding in only one way in your own classroom, or it could be related to specific program requirements at the institutional level, like requiring students to take a full course load. So one of my biggest teacher heroes, Jenna Gabriel, recently said during a podcast interview that it's about designing spaces that enable our students rather than disable them. And that really felt relevant to what we're talking about right here. Jenna is a PhD student in art education at Virginia Commonwealth University with research interests in critical disability studies, special education, political theory, and of course, art education. I could listen to her episode of this podcast a dozen times and probably walk away with something different each time. I really think this should be required listening or reading. There is a transcript for attendees tonight. Seriously. It's a great primer on anti-ableist art ed. I also have a link to her Instagram here where she shares all things anti-ableist art education. She shares artist profiles, adaptive tools, and information about accessibility. She's a great resource. All right, we looked at some common barriers to access. So now I'd like to share some strategies for increasing access, which are based on my own experience as a teacher. We will look at 4, forming positive relationships, creating an accessible studio or classroom and providing adaptive tools, designing curriculum with variability in mind, and ensuring that all of your students see themselves in the art and art history you share in your classroom. So my absolute #1 top strategy for increasing access is to start with building relationships. It takes a ton of time to put together presentations like this that have inclusive clip art and special fonts and text formatting. And it takes resources and time to create or purchase adaptive tools. But one thing you're probably already doing that is tremendously helpful is forming good, close relationships with your students, colleagues, and the families of your students. I cannot stress enough how key this is in creating an accessible environment for your students. You can't do the work of inclusion on your own. It's just not possible. Working with other teachers and service providers in your school will help you learn new strategies and learn more about your students. How many people here tonight are lucky enough to work with paraprofessionals, by the way? I'm gonna pull up the chat. At least a couple people. Okay. Great. So, in my experience, paraprofessionals are some of the best collaborators when it comes to accessibility because they work with students you might only see once or twice a week, all day, every day. I've also had the pleasure of working closely with a variety of service providers like speech, occupational, and physical therapists, special educators, general education teachers, and students and families to create accommodations and modifications that feel appropriate to everyone. And if you do not have service providers on your campus full time, and I think probably most schools don't, one thing you can do is connect with the larger teaching community on social media. The Disability Studies, Arts, and Education group on Facebook is a great place to start if you're an arts teacher. This is a conference, but also a very active community of people sharing resources, tips, publications, all kinds of stuff. I have such a love-hate relationship with Instagram and Facebook, but I have connected with so many incredible people, some of whom are here tonight, through social media and learned so much that it kind of makes it worth it. So if you're not on either of those platforms, this might be a reason to check them out. I also want to spotlight a couple more people to go along with this strategy. I highly recommend following Emmy as a Star for a whole lot of joy, a look at the caregiving and parent advocacy perspective, information about accessibility tools and tech, various therapies, and one family's experience of inclusive model education. And they share tons of resources in their stories too. I'd also like to spotlight Jen White Johnson, who is another amazing parent advocate, but also an educator, artist, and member of the disability community herself. I've linked to her Instagram account here, but I also linked to her neurodiversity advocacy design shop, where you can find really cool stickers like these that say create more anti-ableist spaces, autistic joy, Black disabled lives matter, which you may have seen before. This there was a t-shirt that kind of went viral that she made for her son. And then these zine packs. This is a zine pack she made with her son called the Kids Solidarity Mini Zine Pack. So definitely go check that stuff out. Okay, number 2 is creating an accessible studio or classroom and adaptive tools. In terms of your actual classroom space, you want to make sure you have clear pathways between tables and desks, including when you have students seated at the desk. There's also there are important sensory considerations. So I know art teachers in particular are always running out of places to display student artwork. And sometimes people hang stuff from the ceiling. And once you get the air conditioning going, it can be really distracting to a lot of students. So I try to avoid that as much as possible. It's really important to ensure your classroom has materials that all students can access. I used to have things like grips, table-mounted scissors, stamps, and dot markers in a separate area that myself or other adults in the classroom could grab for students as needed. But I started to make these tools available to all students as a way to reduce stigma, and was surprised by how many students enjoyed using those tools. So here you can see I have a variety of students using PVC T-grips, which are one of my favorite grips. This is just a DIY. You get one of these connector pipes and drill a hole and put a screw in to hold the supplies in place. But I had students in kindergarten or first grade here say, I know I don't need this tool, but I kind of want to try it. And of course, that's fine. Why not? And when I am teaching students how to use supplies, I try to use language like, when I use a paintbrush, I like to use it this way. I can't wait to see how you like to use it, because of course, not everyone uses tools in the same way. I don't have a ton of examples of actual adaptive tools on this page, but I did put together a very extensive free PDF that has a lot of information about tools. And I even made a video that walks you through it. So the QR code here will take you to my website for both of those things. You can also consider digital tools. Something I try to do in all of my presentations and resources these days is use this Open Dyslexic font, which is free. In the PDF, you'll be able to click this, or you can just search Open Dyslexic, and you can upload that font to Canva. I do not think at this point the Google Suite allows you to upload fonts, but Canva does. And I switched from the Google Suite to Canva to create documents and presentations like this one, because there's a surprising amount of inclusive clip art that they have available, and teachers get a free pro account, which includes all of that clip art. And during the pandemic, I also started using Google Forms to collect student ideas. And I love that on Google Forms, you can provide examples and multiple choices right in the form. So that is something from Google Suite I do still use. And in the PDF, you'll receive this icon will be clickable if you want to see an example of a PDF I created for students. I have to include this Jenna Gabriel post here because it brings up some really important questions and literally gives me butterflies when I read it. It's that good. So it says, adaptive tools create access. Grips, so students can hold brushes in ways that are comfortable for them. Tabletop easels, so students can easily reach their work. Velcro and other attachment tools, so art making materials can stay reachable for students who may move unpredictably at times. Graphic organizers that support students in planning their artist statements. Tools such as these allow students to participate fully in the art room, and their importance shouldn't be understated. But we have to ask ourselves, what are they creating access to? Adaptive tools don't change our curriculum. They don't change the artists we represent for our students to engage with. They don't change the behavior management practices we employ. They don't question and dismantle the subtle ways that ableism shows up in our classroom. When adaptive tools include disabled students in a learning context that is otherwise exclusionary, they're not promoting true inclusion. When adaptive tools are employed as a method of remediation for students we believe need to be, quote, fixed, they're not communicating to our disabled students that they matter. In anti-ableist classrooms, we know that our disabled students are already whole. Adaptive tools are chosen, created, and used with our students. They are normalized as part of classroom culture that values interdependence, and they expand opportunities for disabled students to make their own choices. They offer access to a curriculum in which disabled artists are represented, disability justice is discussed, ableist systems are challenged, and disability is celebrated. As teachers, we also see ourselves as learners in community with our students, practicing a critical pedagogy that recognizes the social, cultural, and political context in which we work. This is work that is much bigger than creating an adaptive grip, and knowing that doesn't make that grip any less important. I truly could not have said that better, so I'm so glad Jenna made this post. Let's pause and check in before the next strategy. How are we feeling? I see there's some stuff in the chat. Wide aisles. I'm gonna just read this. Yeah, so once you have people start using the space, your aisles become more narrow because you have students scooting out in chairs and leaning back. So you always want to test that out. I think this is something that's actually pretty easy to overlook, but you know, if there's a barrier to the student accessing your physical classroom, that's a pretty big issue. Okay. All right, and you can, of course, keep putting ideas and thoughts in the chat as we move forward. So number 3, this is a big one, expect and plan for variability. I have a lot of information for you related to this particular strategy. We are going to start with discussing UDL. How many people here tonight have heard of UDL or Universal Design for Learning? Same thing. Awesome. Okay, great. So I might be sharing some things you already know, but just in case, I'm going to go into these a little bit. So before we can talk about UDL, we have to talk about what universal design or universal design in general actually is. So Universal design is the intentional design of an environment so that it can be accessed to the greatest extent possible by all people. The diverse needs of all who will encounter the design are considered and everyone benefits. Curb cuts, which I have a picture of right here, are a great example of universal design, though that was not the initial intention. They were introduced in the 1930s in the UK to aid parents with strollers. They were introduced in the US in the 1940s as a pilot program to aid veterans with disabilities. There was also a project by the Center for Independent Living that led to wider installation of curb cuts on a voluntary basis until the ADA in 1990, which requires them. So you encounter them, anytime you cross the street, hopefully. These cuts benefit not just parents and wheelchair users, but cyclists, folks who utilize a walker or cane, roller skates, skateboarders, etc. Everyone benefits. And I think that's such a great example that ties into universal design for learning. So universal design for learning is a framework to improve and optimize teaching and learning for all people based on scientific insights into how humans learn. UDL aims to change the design of the environment rather than change the learner. And that last part is key. This QR code here is going to link you to a different image that's kind of another version of this that I think sums up UDL really well, but I couldn't find the original source, so I wasn't able to include it in the presentation. But it shows these three principles, which are provide multiple means of engagement, provide multiple means of representation, and provide multiple means of action and expression. We would need an additional 90 minutes to really examine this framework. So instead, I'm going to direct you to the CAST website, where you can learn all about it and how to use it. If you click this, it takes you to the page where all of the UDL guideline downloads are. And then this takes you to a PDF with key questions to consider when planning lessons. And this QR code takes you to the website as well. And by the way, CAST says that these are not a prescription, rather suggestions that can be mixed and matched according to learning goals. Okay, so I have up 6 images of student artwork here, and I have some questions that go with it. I'm going to read the questions and then I'll describe the artwork, do some image descriptions. So the questions are, and I'd love for you to answer any of these in the chat. They don't have to be in order. You can answer just part of a question, any thoughts you have. What do you see and notice? What do the pieces have in common? What's different? Does this feel familiar? Why or why not? And does any work stand out to you? Why or why not? And there are no wrong answers. I just genuinely want to hear people's thoughts. And here I have pictured 6 pieces of student artwork. If you just glance, they look abstract. If you look carefully, you can see that there is a radial design of words. And if you look really closely, you can see that they're names. So in one, you can see the name Sean repeated. There are also 2 examples. 4 of them are collage and look like collage and colored pencil, and then, or not collage, sorry, chalk pastel and colored pencil. And then 2 of them have some stickers on them and some collaging of printed names and little black Sharpie dots. Does anyone want to answer any of those questions? Pieces using symmetry and patterns. The top middle stands out because of the dramatic contrast. Some colors, some patterns, some symmetrical, some random. The bottom middle stands out. And why does that one stand out to you? The Maddie picture stands out to me because, oops, scrolling, because it doesn't radiate out as the others do. I see a frog in the top. Awesome. Interesting shapes. Okay, the bottom middle one looks different than the rest. Bottom middle looks like a city map to me. Bright colors, upper, right, and bottom middle stand out because of use of a different medium. Okay, I'm so glad you said that. So these are examples of student work that were inspired by a teacher-created sample, my sample that I provided. And in this particular class, I had a few students who needed accommodations to create a project like the sample I created. So I gave those students options. Students could use stamps and stickers or select a font and have their name printed to collage rather than write it themselves if that was not accessible to them. And that's an example of a pretty traditional kind of accommodation that you will find. So the students are accessing the same project, they're just receiving a tool to be able to participate in it. So I have 6 more images for you of student work. I have the same questions on there. What do you see/notice? What do the pieces have in common? What's different? Does this feel familiar? Why or why not? Does any work stand out to you? Why or why not? And in these images, just a quick image description, there is one that has a collage of 3D kind of flowers radiating out from light to dark. They're popping off the page. There's a collage of Dr. Phil's face on kind of a quilted background of scrapbook paper. There is a little blank pill bottle with paper flowers on pipe cleaners coming out of it. There is a collage on a yellow background that has different kind of textures and dots. There's a collage of different animals cut out from magazines. And then there's an abstract collage of colorful circles in varying sizes and black Sharpie dots. Different kinds of paper, different arrangements of paper, different shapes, more nature oriented maybe, repeated shapes in each artwork. They all feel like a 3D project. Variety, more organic shapes. So now that I teach in a choice-based classroom, and we're going to talk more about what that means in a second, stickers and pre-cut shapes and stamps, like I provided to just a couple of students in the last examples, are things every student can use. Here, in my opinion, no one piece of work stands out as being different because every single piece of work is unique. And making art class, or really any class, accessible requires a lot of reflection on the part of the teacher. When I zoomed out and looked at my standards, the National Core Art Standards for Visual Art, I realized that I could meet them in a student-centered way that felt more inclusive. I did not need to have students make art that looked like mine or anyone else's in order to teach them techniques, art history, or the behaviors of artists. And what we just looked at are examples from my days of teaching in a DBAE classroom and then a TAB classroom. How many people here have heard of DBAE and TAB, which I will define in a moment? Are those new terms? Have people heard of those? No, yes, 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 both, no. Okay. So I spent about half of my art teaching career teaching discipline-based art education, AKA DBAE, which is the traditional style of art teaching that you probably grew up with, and I did as well. The teacher provides the inspiration, often in the form of a teacher-created project example inspired by art history or a specific medium or technique. I shifted to teaching for artistic behavior, AKA TAB, which is a choice-based philosophy of art education that can be summed up in two sentences. The child is the artist, the classroom is their studio. The teacher creates an open studio environment with studio centers like drawing, painting, collage, etc., and students access those materials independently to create art of their choosing. This is my back to school night slide from the year that we switched to TAB that illustrated the difference between DBAE and TAB. TAB, we had just started it, and we were about a week into the program. So here you can see from DBAE, all of my kindergarten students were creating similar works of art using the exact same materials. They were working on cutting skills, using bright, colorful paper, all on gluing the paper onto a white background to create collages. And here, just the drawing center was open at this point, but you can see the artwork, clearly students were just creating what they wanted to create. We have Mr. Burns, we have a fox, some abstract work. And if you're interested in introducing more choice into your classroom, which I think is a great way to be more inclusive, a quick aside is that one thing you want to be mindful of as you start to provide more opportunities for choice is communication. How will your students communicate to you what choice they would like to make? You might have a little whiteboard on which you can create a grid and add the options. Maybe students have different art supplies or options programmed into their augmentative and alternative communication device, AAC device, like this child, or maybe you have a poster or something that students can reference. This may seem like a little thing, but I learned very quickly that this could be a significant barrier to access. So I just want you to anticipate this ahead of time if you start to provide more opportunities for choice. So you might not be able to switch to tab, or you might not want to switch to tab, or you might not be an art teacher. So we're going to look at the evolution of a specific project of mine for some ways you might make teacher selected projects in any subject feel more inclusive. When I made the switch from DBAE to tab, I had most of my grade levels request to keep at least one project that tied to their curriculum. This still life project connected to both third grade social studies standards as well as our annual field trip to the Getty Museum. Here I have examples of the still life project from my first year doing the project prior to switching to tab. I provide students with what I'm going to call a one-size-fits-all accommodation. My goals with this lesson beyond the cross-curricular ones were teaching about some of the history and origins of still life and some of the elements and principles like value, color, and space. By providing students with clip art line drawings of fruit, which you can see in 2 of these examples, with fruits and vegetables as an accommodation, I ensured that all students had a chance to play with composition and create representational art that looks like something. I provided tempera paint sticks in addition to the chalk, crayons, and oil pastels that all students had access to because they require a lot less pressure to lay down color. So all of my students were able to add color to their work. I had adaptive tools like the PVC pipe T-grips and slant boards, and all students were able to access the curriculum, learning goals, and projects, but I wasn't totally satisfied. And you can see 2 examples, or 4 examples of still life here, 2 that have a collaged element of clip art line drawings of fruit and vegetables, and 2 that have student drawn fruits and vegetables. When I switched to tab and agreed to keep the still life lesson, I decided to allow students to create their still life using any medium. Any student could collage using magazines or printed clip art like in years past, or photographs that I had taken of our real still life display. Students could also create a drawing or painting or make a photograph, build something at the Architecture and Design Center, or create a sculpture. The piece could be abstract or representational. I left it really open-ended. And once again, no one piece stands out as being different because they're all different. We were able to hit the same standards and goals without any one student feeling singled out. Leaving some room for student choice in your curriculum is in a lot of ways planning for variability. And I've found tab to be really well aligned with parts of the UDL framework, but you don't have to go full-blown choice to apply some of the same principles. And choice is not only possible in art. It's really important to know your standards and learning goals for each lesson in order to remove barriers or provide accommodations and modifications. For example, if your students are required to read a novel and your assessment is that they write a paper on it, you might want to consider providing a list of options for sharing their learning, like writing an essay, creating a poster, doing a performance piece, taking a quiz, participating in a class discussion, or creating an animated video, or something else. Don't do this alone. Get together with your team and put your heads together to come up with different ways to expand options for assessments, because it can feel really daunting to do this work at the beginning and start to provide more opportunities for choice. Let me just check the chat really quick. Okay. Do you preprint clip art or have students request items to be printed? So I printed out, I knew the fruits and vegetables that I was going to have in the still life display because the school requested that I bring in real fruits and vegetables. So I printed out and pre-cut a bunch of produce that matched the produce that I had in the real life display. Okay, so regardless of what you teach and how you teach it, there are some really important questions you can ask yourself as you plan new lessons and evaluate old ones that I think will help you better prepare for variability. And we will come back to these questions during our breakout room / work time, but I'd love for you to start thinking about them now. What are some ways you can change the design of the environment rather than the learner? Ensure all students have an opportunity to utilize their existing skills and strengths. Provide opportunities for students to develop appropriate new skills based on individual ability and interest. Optimize choice and autonomy. Vary the methods for response. Okay, that was a lot of info. If anyone wants to put thoughts in the chat or jump on the mic, if that's what is accessible to you, I'd love to hear what you all are thinking before we move on. Or we can just keep powering through. I know it's a lot though. Okay, I want to make sure you have breakout room time, so I'll keep going, but you can always add stuff to the chat. So I want to share one last awesome organization and page I hope you'll go follow. Shane's Inspiration is a global nonprofit that creates inclusive playgrounds and educational programs. Has anyone ever been to a Shane's Inspiration playground? They're not all, the original one pictured here is called Shane's Inspiration, but that each location has a different name. Okay, so cool, right? Oh, and I see a question, does this work for preschool students? Carol, do you mean providing choice or those specific accommodations that I provided for that lesson, or all of the stuff we're talking about?
All of it.
I think it should. I have pretty limited experience teaching in preschool. I have some, but I know when I worked in a preschool, it was a choice-based environment and it felt really inclusive and was a really successful program. So I think all of this should be applicable.
Yeah, I know somebody who's a director of early childhood, and I was thinking she might really enjoy this presentation. That's all.
Oh, awesome. I hope you'll share it with her. It is being recorded, so it'll be on YouTube after the fact. Thank you. About providing choice, how do you handle it when a student does the project quickly and says they're done and they don't want to work further? So I have found when I started doing choice that students were way more invested in the work. So when I would say, everyone's doing a still life, here's how you're doing it. Of course, you have some students who don't like drawing and painting. So, you know, I'm done. But when students are able to come up with their own ideas and make that work, I have found that they're more invested and take their time. It's also really important to note that when students start having more choices, they're in something called the scribble phase, no matter how old they are. This is true for adults too, because it's a lot of work to come up with choices, you know, to make decisions when you haven't had to do that before. So there is a lot of experimenting and play, and you're not going to want to put all that artwork on the fridge or display it, and that's totally fine and should be expected. Yes, scribble phase. Yeah. Oh, and back to Shane's Inspiration. So it sounds like people have been to these playgrounds. They're all over the US and there are some even around the world. We went to the one in Calabasas called Brandon's Village, and it was so cool. So I definitely recommend checking one out. This is the very first one that's in Griffith Park, and it's the actual Shane's Inspiration playground. But the organization also does lots of inclusive events for kiddos, both virtual and in person, and they share great resources. So at this link, you can find their Instagram account, and at this one, you can find a list of all of their playgrounds. And I've also been to a couple of their virtual drag queen bingo fundraisers, by the way, and they're so fun. So they do cool stuff. All right, so my final strategy for increasing access is making sure that your students see themselves represented in the art and history you share with them. If you are teaching the traditional canon of artists or authors, or let's be real, really anything from history that we all learned in school growing up, which consists mainly of a bunch of dead white guys, you are not providing opportunities for all of your students to see themselves. And I know if I do not provide opportunities for my students to see themselves represented by professional artists in the past, they may not be able to see themselves as artists now or in the future. And as a little bonus, my colleague Flavia Zuñiga-West recently was interviewed on the same podcast, Everyday Art Room, about utilizing contemporary artists in your classroom. So it's not exactly on this topic, but they have lots of great reasons for sharing contemporary artists in your classroom, and I would give this a listen. So I'm going to share some cool artists with you that you can add to your repertoire. And before I start sharing artists, I do want to note that I'm not suggesting you do like a standalone unit on disabled artists, because that's othering, right? The idea is really to add some awesome new artists to your curriculum to share when opening a relevant center or in relation to a specific project or unit throughout the entire year. So these first two artists are from LACMA's collection. The first one is Frida Kahlo, and I found out that LACMA has a piece by Frida Kahlo that's promised to the museum, but it's not in their collection yet. So I have a photograph that is in the collection of Frida Kahlo by Hector Garcia. And with Frida Kahlo, I want to say it's really important not to romanticize her chronic pain or focus on her suffering. And I've found even children's books sometimes highlight those things. And actually, before labeling an artist who's no longer living and therefore unable to respond to labels placed on her after her death, we must let her work speak for itself. Ask children what they see in her artwork. The two Frida's painting in particular, which is not pictured here, but can be found at this QR code. It's one of the most famous pieces by her, so odds are you've seen it, sparked some really unexpected conversations in my classes about medical experiences students had. So this is a drawing by one of my, at the time, kindergartners who created this self-portrait inspired by two Fridas. And she was so excited to share her story of having open heart surgery when I think she was just 2 years old, maybe even younger, with the class, and so excited to connect her own life to the experience of a real grown-up artist from the past. So that's the kind of opportunity you're providing your students when you share artists that represent the students that you're teaching. I typically introduce Frida either during a unit on identity as an artist who paints, or ahead of a virtual field trip to La Casa Azul, the Frida Kahlo Museum, which I am obsessed with. So this QR code takes you to La Casa Azul website, where you can take this. This is a screen grab from a field trip when we took TK students there. You can actually navigate through the museum and see, you know, Frida Kahlo's bedroom and kitchen, and my favorite part is the studio. And I had TK students say, oh, cool, a wheelchair. I have a friend who's in a wheelchair, and just kind of make connections to things that they've seen and experienced in their lives. So I think it's a cool thing to consider sharing with your students. Let me check the chat really quick. Okay, so this next artist I'd like to share is named William Scott. This is another artist. This artist is in LACMA's collection. And for artists who are living like this artist here, I think it's really important to draw from their own statements about their work and their biographies when sharing about them, so you're not placing labels on them. And if you're able to connect with an artist directly, perhaps on social media, which I do all the time, you can always ask people how they'd like their work to be introduced or contextualized, which I have an example of soon. With William Scott, you can find an interview with him on the Creative Growth website. I'm going to let you know more about creative growth in a moment. But in this interview, he identifies himself as an architect. So although he is an artist who primarily works in painting, you could actually introduce his work at an architecture and design center in your classroom if you have tab studios. And his work is really centered on building a better city and themes like peace, progress, and rebirth. So William Scott is represented by Creative Growth. It says here, this is from the Creative Growth website. Creative Growth is a nonprofit organization based in Oakland, California, that advances the inclusion of artists with developmental disabilities in contemporary art and strengthens community by providing a supportive studio environment and gallery representation. There is a really wonderful segment on Art 21 about creative growth that I highly recommend watching. And that is linked here. And then there's also a QR code that takes you to the roster of artists represented by Creative Growth. So you will find tons more artists there to share with your students. Really fabulous, colorful work in a huge variety of mediums. And then I also have a few artists to share from outside of LACMA's collection, from elsewhere. So Christine Sun Kim is an artist I've introduced to students during a unit on sound art. A little about her from the White Space Gallery website. It says, in her work, Berlin-based artist Christine Sun Kim, whose first language is American Sign Language, ASL, approaches the concept of sound via deconstructive exercises, experiments, and observations through drawing, painting, and performance. Over the course of developing her own visual language, Kim explores and employs elements from various information systems. By combining aspects of graphic and musical notation, body language, and ASL, she uses these systems as a means to expand what each is able to communicate and to invent a new grammar and structure for her compositions. Kim works within and around the nuances of sound. At what point does noise become sound? When is something appropriate, and whose job is it to determine the agreeability of a sound, a noise, and their ensuing respectability or social capital? And here I have a piece by Christine Sun Kim called Alphabet from the Speller's View, and it's just that. They're drawings of hands, what the ASL alphabet looks like from the speller's point of view. So it's actually a cool teaching tool as well. And this next piece is called Shit Hearing People Say to Me. And I normally wouldn't recommend sharing artwork with bad words in it with younger students. But I shared the work of Christine Sun Kim with my middle school students, and they found this piece on their own. And the reason I'm sharing it with you tonight is because I had a couple of students with disabilities and their families say that the piece really resonated with them. I know it's impossible to read this little text, so I'm going to share a couple of examples with you from the drawing that they connected with. So one of them says, pray to God and he will make you hear. One of them says, you're smart for a deaf person. And one of them says, you're so inspiring, I'm sad you can't hear. None of the students in my class were deaf, but they had heard similar things about like praying to God so they could walk. You just never know what work your students will connect with. So that's why I wanted to share that one with you. I also shared Kim's work during a course on art and activism that consisted of student selected units, one of which was disability justice. Christine Sun Kim did a wonderful TED talk called The Enchanting Music of Sign Language. So I highly recommend you check that out. Jacqueline Romine is a Los Angeles-based queer Latinx photographer. From her own artist statement, it says, I take over spaces to confront my reality while also confronting the intersection of feminist ideals that are formed by my identity as a disabled, queer, Latinx person of color living in the Southern California landscape. And I'm going to share a bit about their series Access Denied, which my students also really connected with. So here it says, and this is just from Jacqueline's own statement, Access Denied is a working project that started in 2015 that deals with inaccessible art spaces around Los Angeles. I am a physically disabled person who has been going to visit art shows for over 10 years, and during that time, I have experienced many instances of inaccessibility. After many instances of exclusion, I could no longer ignore my experience, so I decided to make work about my denied access. By going to an opening or closing of a show that I've been invited to, saw on social media, or knew was inaccessible from prior experience. Then I would sit outside the gallery or art space or performance space for the entire opening or closing and document my performance with help from friends and strangers using videos and photos to tell my story. And I'm going to just, I'm going to press play and just jump to a couple points just so you can see what this, the documentation of this performance piece looks like. So at the beginning, there is a list of the inaccessible art spaces. And I'm just going to jump ahead. There are still photos in here and also video footage of the artist outside of these art spaces that they could not access. You can see here there's a steep flight of stairs. This one looks like it's in the back of a truck. Looks like the world's steepest set of stairs there. So I had students, particularly those who are in a wheelchair, who utilize a wheelchair, say that they had experienced this on, field trips before, at art spaces like this, at restaurants, and really felt like this was a good representation of that experience. I had the pleasure of speaking to Jacqueline about their work over the phone after connecting with them on Instagram. So I know that she's done talks for colleges and high schools before. So I just want to say you can bring the work of artists into your classroom, and you can also consider inviting contemporary artists themselves to visit virtually or in person. The next artist I want to share with you also creates work about inaccessibility, amongst other things. This artist's name is Christopher Samuel. From his website, Christopher Samuel is a multidisciplinary artist whose practice is rooted in identity and disability politics, often echoing the many facets of his own lived experience, seeking to interrogate his personal understanding of identity as a disabled person impacted by inequality and marginalization. Christopher responds with urgency, humor, and poetic subversiveness within his work. This approach makes his work accessible to a wider audience, allowing others to identify and relate to a wider spectrum of human experience. So this piece is called Welcome In from 2019, and I think it still exists. It's a sleep-in installation at Art B&B in Blackpool, which is a room for people to experience inaccessibility. It says, I wanted to challenge the idea that when it comes to access, one size fits all, and to create a conversation around accessibility. It was about designing a space that needs to be experienced to be understood, a slightly theatrical space, one that targets non-disabled people. And that's text from the artist's website. I saw this artist speak recently and felt like this work was perfect for the subject of this talk. So there is a great Daily Mail article on Welcome In that has additional photos of someone actually trying to access the space. They're really funny and will give you a good idea of what the space was like to try and navigate. From that article, it says, Christopher used his own experience to design the room. The Leicester-based artist had become homeless in 2017 and was put in a hotel room that had poor access. He said, I couldn't enter the room normally, use the toilet, or even get on the bed. So I just slept on my chair. And about designing the room, he said, the builders didn't understand what was going on. They kept pulling us to one side and telling us the designs were all wrong and the measurements did not add up. And of course, that was the point, right? I have not shared this work with students yet, but I have a good feeling that they'll really get this work, like the other work I've shared with them. It's humorous and it's a really clever way to invite folks into the experience of not being able to access something. Okay, thank you so much to Francois Gabali Gallery and Christine Sun Kim, Jacqueline Romine, and Christopher Samuel for allowing me to feature their work in this presentation. I would like to invite you to contribute to a Google Doc I started that has a list of cool artists you may want to introduce to your students. And I just started this document. It doesn't have a ton of artists on it, but it's a living editable document, and I can't wait to see what artists you add. And I know Jenna Gabriel also features a lot of artists on her Instagram, so you can head there for inspiration also. Okay, and Laura just also shared that link in the chat to add to that doc. And yes, pay artists to visit your class. Totally. Thank you, Mikol. Okay. All right. So after all of those strategies, and I know that was a lot, I do want to say that once you've done everything you can do with your physical classroom environment to ensure it's accessible, and once you've examined your lessons through the UDL framework, and that takes a lot of time as a team effort and likely requires some additional PD or training on just that subject, the CAST website has conferences and various things you can attend. And once you've done everything you can to make your learning environment and materials as universally accessible as possible, you will still have students who require extra support to be able to access the materials, lessons, assessments, etc. Which is why my #1 tip is to form good relationships with DIS providers, SPED teachers, gen ed teachers, and the families of your students, and of course, the students themselves. You will have students who benefit from adaptive tools, who need direct support from a paraprofessional, and who require accommodations. And there is not a one-size-fits-all trick here. Every human is different. So I want to emphasize once again that you can't do this work alone. It's only possible as part of a team. Okay, I'm going to pause. We do have a little bit more before we're moving on to the breakout rooms, but I know we're getting close to the end. Chat isn't lighting up, so I'm going to keep going forward. Before we head into the breakout rooms, if you want to start a conversation about inclusion and accessibility at your school, this website has a great activity to help. So if you've learned about UDL or inclusion before, odds are you've seen a graphic like this, which shows 3 different scenarios of spectators trying to watch a baseball game from behind a fence. Does this look familiar to anyone? Maybe you've seen a different version of this. Yes, yes. Okay, cool. So this version's called the 4th box. And so the first box shows, it says equality, and it shows 3 different spectators standing on a single crate, whether they need it or not. So the same thing is provided for, you know, every spectator or student, which you can see here doesn't make sense. There's still one spectator who can't see over the fence because there weren't enough crates provided, and one spectator clearly didn't need the crate. The next box says equity, and in that image, you can see that you know, an individualized accommodation was provided. So the person in the center was given 1 box so they can see over the fence, and the person on the right, was given 2 boxes. And then the third image says liberation. And in that image, the fence was torn down so that presumably the spectators can enjoy the baseball game without accommodations. They've removed the fence, which is the barrier to access. The 4th box exercise, and then the 4th box is blank and says your idea here. It's a great conversation starter during staff development and team meetings. And this website also has all kinds of activities you can do with adults or with your students. All right, breakout room time. And this will be a time to meet some new people, reflect, set goals. We're going to head to the breakout rooms in just a moment, but I want to remind you of those questions and share a note catcher I put together with you, inspired by a similar one I received at a UDL training by James McKenna at CSUN, Cal State Northridge. So this is, of course, not an assignment. I want this breakout room time to be meaningful to everyone, and I understand that everyone has different needs and different, you know, reasons to attend this talk. So you can use the time to examine a lesson through the lens of UDL using this. You can connect and reflect with others. You can compile questions, set goals, or otherwise digest what we've talked about, or literally digest your dinner. I don't know what you need. If you would like an example of examining a lesson through the lens of UDL or have any questions, I'm going to ask that you stay in this main room so I can help you with that first. Otherwise, you'll have about, I don't know, let's say 7 minutes in the breakout room, and then we'll come back together to share and ask questions. I'm sorry, it's a little tight. I knew it would be. So if someone could open the breakout rooms, and I'll stay in this main room, and you can stay behind with me if you want an example of how to use this. So you should have an invitation to join one of the rooms. They're completely random. I'll give everyone a moment to join, and then, but if anyone wants to jump on the mic and start asking questions, you can. Oops, I just put a message to the whole group that was supposed to go to Laura. Laura asked me if I'm going to share my slides at the end. I have not created the PDF of them and added them to my drive yet, so I won't have a link for you during the presentation, but I'm hoping I can share those with Laura and she can get those out to all of you. Okay. Is anyone who's still in this main room someone who has a question, wants to jump on the mic, or would like an example?
I'll jump on the mic if no one else is. I'm learning so much, and I teach older students, so some of it's a little bit different, but I'm also really curious about how I can apply a lot of this to my older students' classrooms. But what's a note catcher? I would love an example. Can you tell us more?
Yes, so a note catcher is just a place. So here you can see it says standards, start by looking at a single standard. So you'd go to your standards, and I don't know if you have standards for the age level you teach at the university level. Do you have standards?
Yeah, we have learning objectives. So
okay,
yeah.
So you'd put your learning objective there, and then it has what is the goal of the lesson, what are some barriers. So it's just kind of a place to put your thoughts. It walks you through that process. But I put an example in here just in case anyone wanted to hang out and see. So when I had the opportunity to participate in that UDL workshop with James McKenna, we were asked to rethink a lesson using the UDL framework. And my colleague and I decided to look at our middle school requirement for artist statements, which is probably something you have your students do. I know you had me do one when I was your student. So yes, correct.
I believe so. Yeah.
And you still probably do ask them.
Yes,
too.
we do. Yep.
So we had switched to tab at this point, and we wondered if we could bring an element of choice to the process. I previously provided some accommodations to all of my students that I knew they could all benefit from, like providing sentence starters. So it says, how did you make this work? And then it has, I made the work by, and you could even have this as like a fill in the blank forms as a note catcher. So students could put their thoughts in there. And I had a word bank of keywords. So this is an accommodation that all students received. I also had to create modified artist statement worksheets for certain students who in their IEP had a modified curriculum. So we put together this rubric, and at the top you can see there are a variety of modes of output, like written, presented, an audio recording, a video, or other. So they could come up with their own idea too. And then it still has what the statement could include. It has questions that go along with that. And I have an example of how a student used that. During online learning, my colleague and I also created a Canva template where students could plan their work. And so this says my idea, and they could take images just from Canva, from the little Canva image bank, and put them into the form. So this is great for students who don't have access to writing out their ideas or even sharing them orally. And then the student created the work, and here they had, they wanted to create something representational. They were able to share that here in this planning sheet. And then their parent and paraprofessional that they were working with created some stencils so that they could create representative work without having to, paint a music note. And then over here, the student came up with a new way to do an artist statement, which was using Canva, and they put little blurbs on here, and they typed their responses into an AAC device, because that's, what they use to help with communication, and were able to include images that went along with the artist statement. So even though in the art world, it's traditional to have artists do written artist statements, that's what you'll find at museums and galleries, that's not something everyone can do, right? So just opening it up and providing choices even in that way could be something that you could do with your students.
That's fabulous. That is so fabulous, because I'm teaching, I retired actually, but I'm teaching part-time at community college, and ironically art education, and I'm so excited to see what you did, because I did need to modify several, to make it understandable. And fortunately, I thought, oh, good, I got some of those ideas. Right, but just what a wonderful template, and really for all students, but especially to provide support and excitement for all students. And so I think it's fab. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Oh, I'm so glad it's helpful to you. I'm hoping, people can walk away and just implement some of this stuff right away.
Yes, no, and I'm going to try it out on Thursday. It's the final. So there you go.
Perfect. And if you want to, I'm going to have my contact information at the end. If you want to email me, I don't know if you use Canva or your students do.
Yeah,
a lot of people do. I can actually share this template with you if you are interested.
Oh, thank
and I
you
can
so much.
share my artist statement rubric. I am a sharer. I'll share whatever anyone wants access to.
You never stop learning as an educator. I'm not that I want to announce how old I am, but I've been in the field, for a long time, and in my late 60s. And so every time you know how you keep reinventing and retooling and all that. And I'm so thankful that I got on this today. So thank you so much.
I'm so glad you're here. And that's, I think it's so great to share with our students that we're lifelong learners and model that for them. And yeah. And I think it makes the job more exciting when you've just kind of been doing the same thing for a long time, and it's a really hard job. So of course we're going to do the same thing once we've spent time developing something. But I think it makes the job kind of exciting again, and it makes it more fulfilling, and you see more student participation. And Does anyone else have any other questions? I'm hoping we can close the breakout rooms soon and bring everyone back together. But if anyone in our little group here wants to ask any questions. And can we do maybe one more minute in the breakout rooms? I think tech support's on here, hopefully, and can hear this. So I had another educator refer me to Laura, who came up with this speaker series. The Evenings for Educators already existed. And then Laura came up with this program, I believe. So I did a talk last year in the fall or winter, time has escaped me. And that was part of the Educator Evenings with Educators or for Educators series. And I said, I really want to do a talk on this. So I was able to come back and do that. Oh, good. And Laura says, I'm always looking for educators to give presentations for this series. You can reach out. And then Laura included her email address. Thank you, Laura. And Laura's wonderful to work with. I send a million emails that are very long-winded, and Laura was always prompt in replying and generous with her time. So I've loved working with her.
I love working with teachers, so it's mutual.
You can tell, or I can tell. Okay, so I think a message went out. Are we closing the breakout rooms? Have they been closed?
Hi, breakout rooms are still open, but I sent a 1-minute warning about 30 seconds ago.
Perfect. I will sit and wait. Nicole, do you mean the LACMA YouTube channel?
Yeah, is it just on the LACMA site, or I didn't know if like where your talk and the other talks are archived? Okay.
Yeah, they're on the LACMA YouTube. Laura, I will say, at least for me, and this YouTube's not your job, but just for anyone out there listening, for me, I found it really hard to find the Educator Speaker Series in the evenings for educators, because there doesn't seem to be a playlist that's just those. So you have to kind of scroll through recent videos and then just kind of find them in there. There might be a playlist that I just missed though.
There is a playlist, but for some reason it's really hard to find. So if you use the link that's on the link tree that I shared, it should take you directly to the Educators playlist, and you'll see all of our recordings there.
Thank you.
Okay, Sydney, I'm going to close the breakout rooms.
Perfect. Oh, and I see something in the chat. Is it Ilya? It says Ortizel. That you've shifted deeply in your practice and are now a professor at CSULB and teaching so much about student-centered teaching. That's really exciting. Okay. Do we have everyone back here or?
It'll be about 20 seconds.
Okay. I just want to be respectful of everyone's time. I know we're at the end. I think all I have after this is just sharing my contact information. So, oops, did I share the right thing? Okay, nope, I was also going to have our participants share in this main room what they did in the breakout rooms, but I see it's already 6:30.
Oh,
We're going to do a Q&A. While I'm sharing my contact info, if anyone wants to put anything in the chat, you are welcome to. And in the links that I shared, Nicole, and the PDF of the slides that you'll get after the fact from Laura, I do have a link to the dyslexia font, which is called Open Dyslexic. You can just Google Open Dyslexic and find the font, and they have different versions of it. Some are in the beta format, and yeah, it's a great resource. Okay. So really quick, you've spent the last 90 minutes of your evening with a goal of learning more to better serve your students, but we all know you can't take care of others if you don't take care of yourself. So I always like to end talks with this question: what is one thing, big or small, you are going to do to take care of yourself tonight? And this should be something that's realistic and achievable and could be as simple as taking a shower, which I think is going to be my thing tonight. Yoga, dinner with friends, bath. If you want to share in the chat, feel like you're committing to this. Read some, oh, go to sleep. Yes. That's a good one. Read, cook dinner. for a walk. And thank you everyone so much for joining us tonight. I am on the conference advisory committee for the Adding Voices 2022 conference. I have more about that conference on this slide. It's going to be a great event that's happening in person in Philadelphia and online October 1st and 2nd. But I'm going to go forward to my Instagram handle, which is Sydney Teaching Art. I think I'm pretty good at responding to DMs, so if anyone wants to reach out there, you're welcome to. You can also find the Adding Voices Instagram at Adding Voices Conference. And then my email is sydneyteachingart, same as my Instagram handle, @gmail.com. And then I have free resources on my website, just sydneysnyder.com, and there's a tab that says Teaching Resources. And if you want to email me, I was telling someone else, I'm happy to send you, that template that I shared in the main room, or tea, play a game, drinking water, good ones. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. I'm so glad. I'll leave this up for another minute, but I'm so glad we were all able to be here together tonight. And I'm sorry we didn't get a chance to share together some of our learning, but you're welcome to be in touch.
I also just want to say thank you so much, Sydney, for being here with us this evening. Your expertise, I know you said you're not an expert, but you do know a lot. And I know we're all really appreciative, especially of how generously you shared resources. Making sure all students have access to an equitable arts education is so important and truly life affirming. And you have really shown us how we can take action to make that a reality. So we are incredibly indebted to you, all of us at LACMA. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I was really nervous. I'm glad it felt that way.
And I have shared a link in the chat to a survey. It would be awesome if you all could give us some feedback on how the program went. It helps us, it helps Sydney, it helps us plan future programs. So please fill that out. And we hope to see you at Evenings for Educators next Tuesday. Thanks, everybody. Good night.